Picture this. You've just finished a killer workout. Or maybe, you're just rushing out the door. You dump a scoop of protein powder into a shaker bottle, snap that lid shut, and shake it hard enough to sound like a maraca. But when you pop open that lid, what do you actually get? A lumpy, totally unappetizing mess. Today, we're going to visually unpack exactly why that happens. And trust me, the answer is wild.
We all know the visceral disappointment of this exact moment. Instead of a nice, uniform, smooth liquid, you're staring down at these pale, floating islands. You take a sip, and boom, you hit chalky grit. And then you find those weird, dry pockets of powder clinging for dear life to the plastic, somehow surviving your most vigorous shaking. It kind of feels like a personal failure, right? But the truth is actually much more fascinating, and it's all happening on a microscopic level right inside your bottle.
So, this brings us to the central mystery of our explainer today. Think about it. Protein powder is literally a product designed and manufactured to be mixed into liquids and consumed as a drink. So, why on earth does it behave like it absolutely hates water? Why does it actively fight the very thing it was literally created to do? Well, to figure this out, we actually need to look at how other things dissolve first.
Let's think about what happens when you mix something super simple, like sugar. You stir a spoonful of sugar into a glass of water, and it practically disappears, right? Like magic. It just effortlessly integrates. But protein powder? Protein powder does something entirely different. The second it hits the liquid, it creates this bizarre, soggy exterior, but it completely guards a dry, powdery, chalky core. It's not dissolving. It's defending itself. Now, the reason behind this crazy defensive behavior comes down to a fundamental rule of food science, and it's this. Food is not just ingredients. Food is structure. We tend to look at the back of a nutrition label and just see a list of chemicals and macros, right? But what really dictates how our food behaves, how it feels in your mouth, and whether it actually mixes properly is its physical architecture. Basically, what are those ingredients actually trying to do the very second water touches them? Just look at the exact behaviors of different powders in water. If you dump flour into water, well, it predictably lumps up. Sugar disappears. But protein powder is just uniquely chaotic. Part of it floats, part of it sinks to the bottom like sludge, and part of it somehow pastes itself to the walls with superhuman grip. It behaves exactly like a material that has to be systematically broken open before it can even think about becoming a drink. Let's zoom in a bit. On a microscopic level, you'd think throwing water at a dry powder problem would solve it, right? But initially, water actually makes it worse. When water touches a pile of protein powder, it doesn't just instantly soak through like rain into dry sand. The outside gets wet, it turns super sticky, and it forms this hardened shell around the dry powder trapped inside. Without meaning to, you've accidentally created a perfectly sealed little protein dumpling. Think of it like a really crowded concert with only one tiny entrance door. The people who get to the front of the line arrive first, they cram into the doorway, and suddenly, boom, they block the path. Nobody behind them can get inside. That is exactly what your protein particles are doing. The water reaches those outer particles first. Those particles swell up, they turn sticky, they grab onto each other, and they completely block the water from reaching the dry particles trapped in the center of the clump. In the food science world, solving this whole concert crowd problem comes down to two concepts: wetting and hydration. Now, I know those sound like highly technical, intimidating terms, but they really just describe how easily water spreads across the surface of a powder, and then how easily it can move inside to reach everything else. And the fundamental issue here? Protein powders are just not inherently built to make wetting and hydration easy. You can actually test this yourself by changing up your mixing variables. Try dropping the powder onto a bone-dry bottom of a shaker and then flooding it with water. It's going to pack into this dense, impenetrable mass. But if you have moving liquid already in the bottle, maybe you've got a shaker ball in there, the powder actually gets a fighting chance to spread out before it even has the opportunity to stick to itself. So what this tells us is that preventing those awful, chalky clumps isn't just a matter of the raw chemistry involved. It's literally about choreography. It's about the physical sequence and the movement of how the particles meet the water. A poorly choreographed introduction means the structure entirely fails, and well, you end up chewing your shake instead of drinking it. Let's look a little closer at the protein itself, because proteins, well, they have personalities. Unlike uniform, neat little sugar crystals, proteins are these highly complex, folded, microscopic structures. And here is the kicker. Different parts of that folded shape respond to water differently. They literally have water-loving regions and water-avoiding regions. So you're dealing with a microscopic crowd where half the particles don't even want to cooperate with the liquid you're forcing them into.
And this structural personality changes pretty dramatically depending on the source of the protein. Whey protein, for example, generally has a structure that mixes relatively well. But switch over to plant proteins like pea or brown rice protein, and those particles behave way more stubbornly. They often feel grittier on the tongue because their physical architecture interacts with water in a completely different and frankly much more resistant way.
So that brings up a really massive question. If protein is naturally this stubborn, and plant proteins are even more so, why do some brands mix beautifully? I mean, you've probably bought a tub that disappears effortlessly with just 2 little shakes, and then another tub that turns into floating insulation foam no matter what you do. What exactly is the hidden variable here?
The answer actually lies in a hidden food engineering secret: processing. Or more specifically, a process called instantization. You see, the powders that mix perfectly aren't just magically better. They have been explicitly engineered and processed after the fact so that they wet and disperse easily in liquid. They are instantized. If a powder isn't instantized, you are basically going to be fighting its natural structure every single morning.
A huge part of this instant salinization process involves adding specific structural helpers. The most common one you'll see is lecithin. Now, when people see lecithin on an ingredient label, they sometimes assume it's just some suspicious, unnecessary additive, but it's not. It's a structural bridge. It coats the particles and physically helps the water spread smoothly across that stubborn, folded protein. It completely solves that daily clumping problem for us.
However, manufacturers are constantly playing a giant game of trade-offs. They have to balance creating a high protein content, keeping their costs low, achieving a really specific texture, and maintaining a quote-unquote clean label with fewer ingredients purely for marketing purposes. The reality is, not every design choice favors mixability. If a company prioritizes a hyper-minimalist ingredient list and decides to skip the lecithin or the instantization process entirely, you, the consumer, are going to pay the price in clumps. And hey, this is exactly why those pre-made, ready-to-drink shakes you buy at the store feel so incredibly smooth. They are made in giant facilities using high-shear mixing, perfectly controlled hydration, and super carefully calibrated emulsifiers. Turning raw protein structure into a smooth liquid is really hard industrial work. When you're standing in your kitchen with a plastic shaker bottle, you are manually trying to replicate millions of dollars of factory equipment.
Okay, so how do we actually beat the clumps at home? Well, if the problem is structural, the solution must be structural. First things first, always put your liquid in the bottle first. Give the powder more room to separate rather than packing it into a dry, tight corner at the bottom. If you can, add the powder gradually. And absolutely, most importantly, you've got to use the shake, rest, shake method.
The absolute magic of the shake, rest, shake method lies in the 20-second rest. You shake it up, and then you just wait. You pause for about 20 seconds. This brief little intermission is crucial because it gives the water the necessary time to actually seep past that sticky outer shell of our protein dumpling and move inward to hydrate the dry core. It stops the water from just violently attacking the outside of the clumps over and over to no avail.
Whenever you snap that lid shut, your shaker bottle effectively becomes this intense, microscopic battlefield. It is a literal war between hydration and access. The clump is trying its hardest to seal itself off and protect its dry center, while the water is frantically trying to break in. The clumps happen simply because that defensive structure forms way faster than your liquid can break it apart.
So the crucial point to take away is this. The next time you encounter a stubborn, lumpy shake, don't just immediately blame the flavor or the brand. Recognize the incredible structural physics happening right there in your hands. Smoothness isn't automatic, it is built. Food is not just a list of ingredients, it is a complex architecture. Which leaves us with one final thought to chew on, pun definitely intended. If something as simple as protein and water relies this heavily on microscopic choreography to function, what other invisible structures are secretly controlling the food you eat every single day?